You think you know how the West was won? You've heard the stories. Cowboys and Indians, lawmen and outlaws, good versus evil, drawn in a neat line right down the middle of a dusty street. But the truth is, the line was never straight, and sometimes the most dangerous man in the territory isn't the one the history books warn you about. Sometimes he's the only one you can trust. This is the story of a woman from Boston who walked into the heart of a war zone looking for her father. What she found instead was a murder, a conspiracy, and a love so forbidden it would either save everyone or get them all killed. So buckle up, because the story you're about to hear isn't the one they told you in school. The Arizona sun didn't just shine in 1885, it attacked. It was a physical weight, a hammer of pure heat that beat down on the dusty, forgotten town of Copper Ridge. The air itself shimmered, making the distant mountains look like they were melting. This wasn't a place people came to. It was a place they ended up. And Amelia Hartwell had just ended up. She stepped down from the stagecoach, her elegant green traveling dress already coated in a fine layer of red dust. Every eye in town was on her. She was like a creature from another planet. Her hair, the color of a new penny, was pinned up in a way no one here had ever bothered to learn. Her skin was so pale it looked like it had never seen the sun. At 22, she was a porcelain doll dropped in a bucket of mud, and the town stared, a mix of curiosity and contempt in their eyes. A man with a tin star pinned to his vest and a face like a worn leather boot separated himself from the shadows of the saloon porch. "Miss Hartwell?" Sheriff Tom Bradley. His voice was gravel. "I am." Amelia's voice was steady, practiced. The kind of voice you learn in finishing school back east. It sounded alien here. The sheriff took off his hat, a gesture that was supposed to be respectful, but his eyes were grim. "Afraid I've got some bad news, ma'am, about your father." Amelia's heart, which had been pounding from the journey, suddenly went still and cold. She'd come all this way from Massachusetts. 5 years since she'd seen him. 5 years of angry letters, and then finally a worried one from him, hinting at trouble, asking for her help. Not begging, never begging. Her father didn't know how, but it was enough to make her cross a continent. "What is it?" she asked, her knuckles white where she gripped her travel bag. "There was a raid on his ranch 3 nights ago." The sheriff paused, letting the words hang in the brutal heat. "It was the Apache, miss, led by their war chief, a real devil. They call him Nalish." The name meant nothing to her, just a guttural sound. "Your father, he fought back," the sheriff continued, looking at the ground. "But there were too many. He didn't make it, miss. I'm truly sorry." The world tilted. The shimmering air, the dusty street, the faces of the silent townspeople. It all blurred into a meaningless painting. Dead. She'd come all this way to maybe, finally forgive the man who chose this harsh, unforgiving land over his own family. And now he was just gone. A ghost in the dust. "The ranch?" she whispered, the word tasting like ash. "Lost, miss. Most of the stock driven off. The hands, they scattered. Smartest thing to do. It's not safe out there. Not with Nalish on the warpath." As if the sheriff had summoned him with his words, a sound began to build at the edge of town. It started as a low rumble, a vibration in the soles of her feet. Then it grew into the unmistakable thunder of a dozen horses moving at speed. People scrambled. Doors slammed shut. Windows were shuttered. The lively street became a ghost town in seconds. Sheriff Bradley grabbed Amelia's arm. "Get inside, now!" But she couldn't move. She was frozen, watching the riders emerge from the heat haze. They were Apache, and they moved like a force of nature. Their horses powerful, their bodies lean and hard. At their head was a man who seemed to be carved from the desert itself. He was tall, broader in the shoulder than any man she'd ever seen, and he sat on a jet-black stallion as if he'd been born there. His skin was the color of rich copper, his black hair long and flowing, tied back with a simple leather cord. Tattoos snaked up his arms, intricate lines that spoke of a history she couldn't possibly understand. He looked to be about 30, with a face that was all sharp angles and brutal beauty. His eyes, They were the darkest things she had ever seen. It had to be him, Nalish, the man who killed her father. Her heart should have been filled with hate, with fear. But as he rode closer, all she could feel was a strange, terrifying awe. This was not the slavering savage from the dime novels back east. This was a king. Then across the dusty, empty street, his eyes found hers. Time stopped. The heat, the dust, the fear. It all vanished. There was only the impossible distance between them and the force of his gaze. It felt like he was looking past her skin, past her bones, straight into the part of her soul she kept hidden from the world. She saw no cruelty in his eyes, no malice. She saw intelligence, power, and something else. A flicker of surprise, a question. It was as if he was just as shocked to see her as she was to see him. "I said, get inside!" The sheriff's hand was a vice on her arm, yanking her toward his office. He shoved her through the door and slammed it shut, dropping a heavy wooden bar into place. He was breathing heavily, his face pale under his tan. "Don't you ever do that again," he hissed. "Don't you ever look one of them in the eye. Especially not that one. That's Nailish, the butcher of Copper Ridge. He's the one who put your father in the ground. You remember that." Amelia leaned against the door, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to summon the hatred, the righteous anger she was supposed to feel, but all she could see were those eyes, and all she could think was that the sheriff's story. It didn't feel right. Something was wrong. The man she had just seen wasn't a mindless butcher. He was something else entirely. And as she stood there in the dark, dusty sheriff's office, she made a decision. She wasn't running. She was staying. She was going to find out what really happened to her father, even if it meant facing the devil himself. The Hartwell Ranch wasn't just in shambles. It was a tombstone. The house had been ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied onto the floor. It was a scene of pure violation. But as Amelia walked through the wreckage of her father's last years, she started to see things, small things that didn't add up. The sheriff had said it was a raid, Apaches driving off cattle, taking what they could. But her father's desk, the one he'd built himself, had been splintered open with an axe. Not just searched, but destroyed. And in the corner of the room, half hidden under a fallen bookshelf, was a small leather-bound journal. It was scuffed and worn, but the lock was intact. She found the key in a loose floorboard under his bed, a place he must have thought was safe. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first half was what she expected. Notes about cattle, the weather, the daily struggles of a man trying to tame an untamable land. But then, the entries changed. October 12th. Met with N today. He is not the monster they say. He speaks of peace. He fears the hotheads among his own people as much as I fear the fools among mine. We trade in secret. He brings knowledge of the land. I bring medicine for his people. It is a dangerous game. N. It had to be Nailish. Her father was trading with the man who supposedly killed him? It made no sense. She kept reading, her blood turning to ice. November 3rd. There is a shadow in this valley, a white man stoking the flames of hatred. He wants war. He offers whiskey to the young Apache warriors, trying to turn them against N. He spreads lies in town, calling me an Indian lover. I fear he knows about our meetings. His name is Morrison, a brute with cruel eyes, Buck Morrison. She remembered the name. The sheriff had mentioned him, a local rancher who was always stirring up trouble. November 10th. The deal is almost done. N believes we can create a treaty, a sanctuary. This valley could be a place of peace. But Morrison is getting bolder. He knows this ranch has the only year-round spring for 50 miles. If there's a war, the army will come, and the army will need water. He stands to make a fortune. He wants my land, and he'll spill any amount of blood to get it. The final entry was dated the day before the raid. November 15th, N is coming tonight. We will sign the agreement. He is bringing his elders as witnesses. I pray we are not too late. The shadow is watching. Amelia closed the journal, her mind reeling. This wasn't a raid. It was an assassination. Her father hadn't been killed by Apaches. He'd been killed because he was trying to make peace with them. And someone had made it look like the very man he was working with was his murderer. A cold, hard anger began to replace her grief. Sheriff Bradley had lied to her. He'd painted Nailish as a monster, the clear and simple villain. Why? Was he incompetent? Or was he part of it? She had to know. She spent the next day cleaning, restoring some semblance of order to the house. But her mind was racing. She needed help. She couldn't trust the sheriff. The only other person her father had mentioned was an old ranch hand named Pete. But Pete, according to the sheriff, had fled. That evening, as the sun bled across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple, she saw him, a lone rider, sitting motionless on a ridge overlooking the ranch. Even from a distance, she knew who it was. The powerful silhouette, the way he sat his horse with an unnatural stillness. Nailish. He wasn't raiding. He wasn't scouting. He was just watching. Was he mourning his fallen friend? Or was he the killer, returning to the scene of the crime? The journal said one thing, but the entire territory said another. Her heart was at war with her mind. She should have been terrified. Instead, she walked out onto the porch, making it clear she'd seen him. She stood there, her hands on her hips. A silent challenge. What do you want? For a long time he didn't move. The sun dipped below the horizon, and he became a black shape against a darkening sky. Then just as true night fell, he turned his horse and vanished over the ridge. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't attacked. He had just watched. And Amelia knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was far from over. She was a piece in a game she didn't understand, and she was standing on the deadliest square on the board. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in her father's chair, his old shotgun across her lap, and listened to the sounds of the desert. Every coyote's howl, every rustle in the sagebrush sounded like a footstep. She was alone, utterly and completely alone, or so she thought. The next morning, an old man on a tired-looking mule rode into her yard. He was grizzled and weathered, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Ma'am," he said, tipping a dusty hat, "name's Pete Morrison. I used to work for your father. I heard you were staying on. Figured you might need a hand." Pete Morrison, Buck Morrison's uncle. The journal had made it sound like they were enemies. Could she trust him? She had no choice. "You're Pete?" she asked. "The sheriff said you fled after the raid." Pete spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "The sheriff says a lot of things. I didn't flee. I was tracking, but I lost the trail." He paused, his eyes scanning the yard. "This wasn't Apaches, miss. Not the ones I know, anyway. The tracks were wrong, messy, and they were shod horses. Nailish's warriors ride barefoot. Shod horses, military horses, or ranch horses, white men's horses. It was the first piece of real evidence, the first crack in the sheriff's perfect story. "What do you know about your nephew, Pete?" she asked, her voice low. The old man's face darkened. "I know he's poison. Always has been. Got a greed in him that'll burn this whole territory down if he ain't stopped." He looked her square in the eye. "Your father, he was a good man. He saw a better way. Some folks don't like new ways. He knew. He knew about the peace treaty. He was meeting with Nailish, wasn't he?" Amelia pressed. "The night he died." Pete's eyes widened in fear. He looked around nervously, as if the very rocks were listening. "Miss, that's talk that'll get you killed. You need to pack your bags and get back on that stagecoach to Boston. This ain't your fight." "My father was murdered," she said, her voice hard as steel. "That makes it my fight." Before Pete could answer, they heard them. Hoofbeats, not the thunder of Apache warriors, but the swaggering, sloppy rhythm of a different kind of rider. 5 men rode into the yard, led by a burly, bearded man with a sneer permanently etched onto his face. His eyes were small and cruel, and they raked over Amelia in a way that made her feel dirty. Buck Morrison, the shadow from her father's journal. "Well, well," Buck drawled, swinging down from his horse. "Look what we have here. The Eastern Princess, playing rancher." He took a step closer, his men fanning out behind him. "And my dear old Uncle Pete. Thought you'd run off with your tail between your legs." "What do you want, Buck?" Pete said, his hand moving subtly toward the worn pistol at his hip. Just came to offer the little lady some friendly advice, Buck said, his eyes never leaving Amelia. This is dangerous country. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be out here alone, especially with word going around that you're getting friendly with the savages. Amelia's blood ran cold. How could he know? I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Buck laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Oh, I think you do. We see a lot from the ridges. We saw the Apache chief pay you a little visit last night. Just sitting up there, watching you. Real romantic. He was twisting it, making it look like something it wasn't. He was painting her as a traitor to scare her off, because he knew she was getting close to the truth. This is my land, Amelia said, her voice shaking with rage, not fear. And I'm ordering you to leave. Buck's smile vanished. That's where you're wrong, princess. This land is about to belong to someone who knows how to use it. Someone who ain't afraid to get their hands dirty. He took another step, his intentions clear and ugly. Maybe you just need a real man to show you how things work out here. Pete drew his gun. That's far enough, Buck. But he was one old man against 5. It was a fight he couldn't win. Buck's men drew their own weapons, laughing. It was over. She had failed. She was going to die right here, in the same dust her father had died in. And then a new voice cut through the air, a voice as calm and deadly as a snake in the grass. He is right. You do need a man to protect you. Everyone froze. They turned. Standing at the edge of the yard, having appeared as silently as a ghost, was Nailish. He wasn't alone. Behind him, melting out of the landscape, were 10 of his best warriors. Their faces were painted. Their weapons were drawn. They looked like spirits of vengeance. Nailish walked forward, his eyes locked on Buck Morrison. He moved with a grace that was terrifying, a predator closing in on its prey. He stopped beside Amelia, so close she could feel the heat coming off his body. The gesture was unmistakable. He was placing himself between her and the threat. Buck stared, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This ain't your business, Apache. This is between white folk. Nailish's gaze was utterly contemptuous. You are on this land. You are threatening this woman. That makes it my business. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that silenced everyone. He looked down at Amelia, and for a fraction of a second, his hard expression softened. Then he looked back at Buck. She is under my protection, he said, the words echoing in the sudden, dead silence. She is mine, and I protect what is mine. The claim hung in the air, a shocking, impossible declaration. An Apache war chief, the supposed murderer of her father, was claiming her in front of a gang of white men. Amelia's mind was spinning. This was a lie, a tactic to save her life. It had to be. But when she looked up at him, at the fierce possessiveness in his eyes, a strange, terrifying thought took root in her heart. What if he meant it? Buck Morrison was sputtering, his bravado crumbling in the face of the silent, deadly warriors arrayed against him. You're crazy. The whole territory will come down on you for this. The cavalry... Let them come, Nailish said, his voice flat. But you will not be here to see it. Leave now, and if you ever set foot on this land again, or speak this woman's name, my warriors will hunt you down and peel the skin from your bones while you watch. The threat was so specific, so brutal, that one of Buck's men actually whimpered. They scrambled for their horses, their retreat clumsy and panicked. As Buck rode off, he shot one last look of pure hatred at Amelia. You'll regret this. You've signed your own death warrant, you Apache whore. The insult was ugly, but it had no power, not with Nailish standing beside her like a mountain. The dust settled. The warriors melted back into the landscape, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Soon it was just her, Nailish, and a stunned-looking Pete. Pete found his voice first. Lord have mercy, Miss Amelia. What in tarnation have you gotten yourself into? But Amelia wasn't listening. She was staring at Nailish. Why? She whispered. Why did you say that? That I was... yours? He turned to face her fully. The midday sun caught the sharp planes of his face, the intensity in his dark eyes. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. His touch was like a brand. Because, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her entire body. From the first moment I saw you in that dusty street, I knew it was the truth. I watched you from the hills. I saw you stand your ground. I saw the fire in your spirit. My people have a word for it. It means fate. From the moment you arrived, our paths were one. He was the man who supposedly murdered her father, a man her entire world would call a savage. She should be running, screaming. But the truth of her father's journal, the lies of the sheriff, the evil in Buck Morrison's eyes, it had all turned her world upside down. Right was wrong and wrong was this. Standing so close to this dangerous, impossible man and feeling, for the first time since she'd arrived, completely safe. My father, she said, her voice catching. The journal said you were friends, that you were working for peace. A shadow of pain crossed his face. He was more than a friend. He was a brother. I was to meet him that night. I was delayed by a storm in the mountains. By the time I arrived, he shook his head, the memory too painful. I was too late. I found him. And I have carried the shame of my failure every day since. It was Buck, she said. He wanted the ranch for the water. He wanted to start a war. I know, Nalish said, and he used my name to cover his crime. He turned my people against your people. He turned your people against me. And he made me look like the killer of the only white man I have ever trusted. The confession was a torrent, a release of pain and guilt he had held for weeks. He had been watching her not just out of fascination, but out of a deep, painful sense of duty. He felt he owed her father's memory, his protection. This is impossible, she breathed, but she didn't move away. She leaned into his touch. No, he said, his other hand coming up to cup her face. What is impossible is that your people sent you here to die. What is impossible is that men like Buck Morrison are allowed to poison the land with their hate. Us? He looked deep into her eyes. We are the only thing that makes sense. And then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, hungry. It was the kiss of two people who had been utterly alone and had just found the other half of their soul in the most unlikely place in the universe. It was a kiss full of grief and anger, and a desperate, burning hope. When he pulled away, they were both breathless. The world had irrevocably shifted. There was no going back. This changes everything, she whispered. Yes, he said, a fierce, protective fire in his eyes. Now we don't just mourn your father, we avenge him. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a forbidden love. It was about justice. They were allies, bound by a shared loss and a common enemy. And they were about to bring a war of their own down on Copper Ridge, a war of truth. Pete, who had been watching the whole exchange with his mouth hanging open, finally spoke. Well, I'll be, he muttered, shaking his head. James Hartwell, you magnificent old fool. You actually did it. You found a way. Amelia looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Pete's tired eyes were shining with something that looked like hope. Your father, miss. He always said the only way to beat the hate was with something stronger. Looks like he was right. He looked between Amelia, the refined lady from Boston, and Nalish, the feared Apache war chief. And there ain't nothing stronger than that. But their enemy wasn't just a thug like Buck Morrison. The conspiracy went deeper. The sheriff was involved. And they were about to find out just how deep the rot in Copper Ridge truly went. The kiss had sealed their alliance, but it had also just painted a target on both of their backs, bigger and brighter than the unforgiving Arizona sun. The plan was simple and insane. Nalish couldn't ride into town. He was a wanted man, blamed for a crime he didn't commit. Amelia couldn't just accuse the sheriff and Buck Morrison. It was her word, the word of an outsider, an Apache lover, against theirs. They needed proof, hard proof. There was another hand at the ranch, Pete said, his mind working. Young fella named Billy. He saw the whole thing. That's why he really ran. Not 'cause he was scared of Apaches, but 'cause he was scared of what he saw. If we can find him, get him to talk. Where is he? Amelia asked. Heard he was hiding out in the mining camps up in the Dragon Mountains, Pete said. But Buck's got ears everywhere. Going after him is a suicide mission. Then it is a mission for a ghost, Nalish said. He was looking at Amelia, his expression intense. I cannot go. My warriors cannot go. They would be seen. But you, me? Amelia's heart hammered. The Dragon Mountains were notoriously lawless, a place where men disappeared every day. You are a ghost to them, Nalish explained. They think you are just a woman, frightened, alone. They would not expect you to hunt them. He took her hands. His were rough and calloused, but his grip was gentle. Pete will guide you. My best tracker, Kale, will watch you from the shadows. He will not be seen, but he will be there. If you are in danger, he will intervene. It was a terrifying prospect, but looking at Nalish, at the trust in his eyes, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. Her father had been a fighter. It was time she became one too. I'll do it, she said. The journey was brutal. The mountains were a maze of canyons and sheer cliffs. Pete, for all his age, moved through them with a quiet confidence. But Amelia always felt a second pair of eyes on them. She never saw Kyle, but she knew he was there, a silent guardian angel with a bow and arrow. The mining camp was worse than she could have imagined. It was a collection of ragged tents and crude shacks clinging to the side of a mountain, populated by desperate men with haunted eyes. Finding one boy named Billy seemed impossible. They started in the only saloon, a filthy tent that smelled of stale beer and unwashed bodies. Pete did the talking, asking casually about a young ranch hand. The miners were suspicious, their answers short and unfriendly. No one had seen him. Amelia felt a surge of despair. They had come all this way for nothing. As they were about to leave, a drunk old prospector grabbed her arm. His eyes were bleary, his breath foul. You're looking for the boy who saw the Ghost Riders? He slurred. Amelia's heart leaped. Ghost Riders? Aye, the prospector whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. The boy, Billy. He babbles about it when he's deep in his cups. Says he saw white men dressed as Indians. Says they killed the old rancher. Says the sheriff himself was with him. The sheriff. It was true. He wasn't just covering for Buck. He was a murderer. Where is he? Amelia demanded. The prospector pointed a shaky finger toward a dark corner of the tent. Over there, trying to drink the ghosts away. Billy was barely a man, maybe 19, with a face pale with fear and cheap whiskey. When he saw them, he tried to run. Billy, wait, Amelia said, her voice gentle but firm. We know what you saw. We're not here to hurt you. My name is Amelia Hartwell. It was my father who was killed. The boy froze, his eyes wide with terror. They'll kill me, he whimpered. The sheriff, Morrison. They said they'd find me and gut me if I ever told anyone. They will kill you if you stay here, Pete said grimly. Your only chance is to come with us. Testify against them. The territorial marshal will protect you. It took another hour of convincing, but finally broken and terrified, Billy agreed. He knew he was a dead man either way. This was his only sliver of hope. They slipped out of the camp under the cover of darkness. The journey back was even more tense. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. They knew Buck would have men watching for them. Their fears were realized on the second day. They were moving through a narrow canyon when the first shot rang out. A bullet splintered the rock just inches from Amelia's head. They were ambushed. 4 of Buck's men were on the ridge above them, rifles in hand. They were trapped. Pete shoved Amelia and Billy behind a cluster of boulders. Stay down, he yelled, firing his own pistol up at the ridge. But it was hopeless. They were pinned down, outgunned. This is it, Amelia thought. We failed. Then she heard a sound, a soft thwip, almost silent. One of the men on the ridge cried out and fell. An arrow was sticking out of his chest. Thwip, thwip. 2 more men fell in quick succession, arrows appearing in their throats as if from nowhere. The 4th man, panicking, stood up to run. A final arrow took him in the back. He tumbled down the rocks and landed in a heap a few feet from their hiding place. Silence. Slowly, Amelia looked up. A figure stood on the ridge now. An Apache warrior, his bow held loosely in his hand. Kyle. He gave a slight nod down at them, a silent acknowledgement, and then melted back into the rocks, gone as quickly as he'd appeared. They were safe. Nalish had kept his word. They made it back to the ranch just after sunrise, exhausted but alive. And they had their witness. Nalish was waiting for them. The relief on his face when he saw Amelia was so profound, it stole her breath. He strode forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. For a moment, he wasn't a war chief. He was just a man, terrified of losing the woman he loved. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair. "We have him," she said, pulling back. "Billy, he saw everything. He'll testify." Their victory was short-lived. Just as they began to formulate a plan to get Billy to the territorial capital, a large dust cloud appeared on the horizon. It wasn't Buck and his thugs. This was organized, discipline, cavalry, a full company, and riding at their head were Sheriff Bradley and Captain William Hayes, a stern-faced officer with a reputation for being by the book. Buck Morrison was with them, a smug, triumphant look on his face. It was a trap. It had always been a trap. Buck hadn't sent his men to kill them in the canyon. He'd sent them to delay them, to keep them occupied until the army arrived. The soldiers surrounded the ranch, rifles at the ready. "Amelia Hartwell," Sheriff Bradley shouted, his voice dripping with false authority, "you are harboring a fugitive and conspiring with a hostile. Come out with your hands up." Nalish's warriors, who had been hidden nearby, began to emerge from the rocks, their own weapons ready. The air crackled with tension. One wrong move, and the entire valley would be soaked in blood. "No," Nalish said, putting a hand on his lead warrior's chest. "Not with guns." He looked at Amelia. "With the truth. Do you trust me?" She nodded, her heart in her throat. "With my life. Then we face them together." They walked out of the house, unarmed, with Pete and a terrified Billy following behind them. They stopped in the center of the yard, surrounded by 40 soldiers. "Captain Hayes," Amelia called out, her voice clear and strong. "You are being deceived. Sheriff Bradley is the criminal here. He and Buck Morrison murdered my father, James Hartwell, in cold blood." A murmur went through the soldiers. Captain Hayes looked surprised. Buck Morrison laughed. "Listen to her. She's been bewitched by this savage. He's the murderer. I saw it with my own eyes." "Then you must have seen me there too, Mr. Morrison," the sheriff added smoothly, "because I was the one who led the posse that drove him off." They had their story straight. It was perfect, believable. "Captain," Amelia said, her voice pleading, "my father served with you in the Mexican War. He spoke of you. He said you were a man of honor. I am asking you as his daughter to listen to the real truth." Captain Hayes' expression changed. The name James Hartwell clearly meant something to him. "I did know your father, miss. He was a fine man, which makes this situation all the more disturbing." He looked at Nalish, his eyes hard as stone. "This is the Apache who has been leading raids across the territory. He is a killer." "No!" a small voice squeaked. It was Billy. All eyes turned to him. He was trembling like a leaf, but he stood his ground. "He ain't the one. I saw it. I was there. It was them." He pointed a shaking finger at Buck and the sheriff. "They dressed up like Indians. They killed Mr. Hartwell when he wouldn't sell the ranch. They shot him down, and the sheriff, he was the one who fired the last shot." The accusation was so shocking, so direct, that a dead silence fell over the ranch. The sheriff's face went white. Buck's turned purple with rage. "The boy is lying," Buck roared. "He's been threatened by the Apache. Coerced." "Is that so?" Nalish said, stepping forward. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Then perhaps you can explain this." He held up a single, unique object, a silver bullet. "My warrior, Kyle, recovered this from the body of one of your men in the canyon yesterday. A silver bullet, a novelty, just like the one I found in the wall of James Hartwell's home the night he died. It is your signature, is it not, Morrison? The mark of a man who thinks he is a legend?" Buck's eyes widened in horror. He had been exposed. "And you, Sheriff," Amelia said, pressing the advantage. She held up her father's journal. "My father kept a record of everything. Your meetings with Morrison, your threats, your plan to start a war for profit. It's all in here." Captain Hayes looked from the journal to the silver bullet, then to the terrified face of the witness, Billy, and finally to the panicked, guilty expressions on the faces of the sheriff and Buck Morrison. The pieces were clicking into place. He was a career soldier, but he was no fool. He knew the stench of a conspiracy when he smelled it. "Sheriff Bradley, Mr. Morrison," Captain Hayes said, his voice cold as ice. "You will lay down your weapons. You are under arrest pending an investigation by the Territorial Marshal." It was over. The truth had won. But men like Buck Morrison don't surrender. With a wild cry of rage, Buck drew his pistol. But he didn't aim it at the captain. He aimed it at Amelia. "If I'm going down," he screamed, "I'm taking the whore with me." He fired. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The flash of the gun, the roar of the shot. Amelia didn't have time to scream. She just closed her eyes, waiting for the impact. But it never came. Nalish had moved faster than humanly possible. He had thrown himself in front of her, a human shield. The bullet, meant for her heart, slammed into his shoulder. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. He straightened up, his eyes blazing with a fury that was almost supernatural. Before Buck could fire again, Nalish closed the distance between them. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. He disarmed Buck with one move, breaking his wrist. With his other hand, he grabbed Buck by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Captain Hayes shouted, "Hold your fire!" Nalish held the sputtering, choking man in the air, his knuckles white. He could have crushed his windpipe with a twitch of his fingers. The entire valley held its breath. This was the moment. The savage killer the legends spoke of was finally unleashed. But then he looked at Amelia. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also her faith in him. With a guttural roar of disgust, he threw Buck Morrison to the ground at the captain's feet. "Your people," Nalish growled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Your justice." He had chosen mercy. He had chosen her way. He had chosen peace, even in the face of his own pain and rage. In that moment, everyone saw him for who he truly was. Not a savage, not a butcher, but a leader, a man of honor. Captain Hayes looked at Nalish with a newfound respect. He then turned to his soldiers. "Arrest them," he commanded, gesturing to the pathetic forms of Buck and the sheriff. "And get this man a doctor." As the soldiers took the conspirators away, Amelia rushed to Nalish's side, tearing a strip from her dress to press against his wound. "You're hurt," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He looked down at her, a small, pained smile on his lips. "It is only a scratch, little warrior. A small price to pay." "For what?" she asked. "For everything," he said. The war for Copper Ridge was over, but the fight for their future was just beginning. 6 months later, the Hartwell Ranch looked different. The scars of the past were still there, but they were healing. The house was repaired, the fields were planted, and the sound of laughter often drifted on the desert wind. It had become a place of meeting, a neutral ground where Apache elders and U.S. Army officers could talk, guided by the quiet wisdom of Nalish and the fierce intelligence of Amelia. The peace treaty her father had died for was finally becoming a reality. They were married on a warm spring day under the vast Arizona sky. It wasn't a white wedding or an Apache ceremony. It was both. A frontier preacher stood beside an Apache shaman. Cavalry soldiers in their dress blues stood next to Apache warriors in their ceremonial paint. Old Pete, his eyes misty, walked Amelia down an aisle lined with sagebrush and wildflowers. When Nalish, his arm now fully healed, saw her in her simple white dress, the look in his eyes was one of pure reverence. He took her hand, and together they faced their two worlds, united as one. Their vows were spoken in English and in Apache, a promise not just to each other, but to the future they were so bravely trying to build. When they kissed, a cheer went up that seemed to shake the mountains themselves. It was a sound of impossible joy, a sound of hope reborn from ashes. A year later, their daughter was born. They gave her two names. In English, she was Hope. In Apache, she was Ithaca, which meant the same thing. She had her mother's emerald eyes and her father's warrior spirit, a living symbol of the world her parents had fought to create. They didn't solve every problem. There were still men like Buck Morrison in the world, filled with hate and fear. There were still politicians back east who saw the frontier only as a thing to be conquered, not understood. The fight was never truly over. But on their ranch, in their valley, they had created a sanctuary. One evening, years later, Amelia and Nalish sat on their porch, watching their children. They had a son now, too, play in the twilight. The world had changed. The railroad had come through and the territory was on its way to becoming a state. The old wars were fading into memory, becoming stories to tell the next generation. Nalish took her hand. It was a gesture she knew as well as her own heartbeat. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The world you left behind, the drawing rooms, the fancy dresses?" Amelia looked out at the land that was now her home. The rugged mountains, the endless sky, the tough, beautiful people, both Apache and white, who had become her family. She thought of the woman she had been, the porcelain doll who had stepped off that stagecoach, and she barely recognized her. She had come looking for a father she had lost long ago. Instead, she had found herself. "No," she said, her voice full of a deep, peaceful certainty. "My life didn't begin until I got here." He smiled, that rare, brilliant smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "Mine too." The story of Amelia and Nalish became a quiet legend in that corner of the West. Not a loud, bloody tale for the dime novels, but something truer. A story about how the hardest frontiers are not on any map. They are the borders we draw between each other, the walls we build in our own hearts. And the only thing that can ever tear them down is courage. The courage to see the truth, the courage to fight for justice, and most of all, the courage to love, even when the entire world tells you it's impossible. So let me ask you a question. When you look at the world, at the lines drawn in the sand, what do you do? Do you accept them? Or do you, like Amelia, dare to step across? The choices we make, the love we choose over fear, that's the legacy we leave behind. The story of Amelia Hartwell and the Apache war chief Nalish proves that one brave choice, one impossible love, can be enough to change the world. If their story moved you, if you believe that the human heart is stronger than any border, then make sure you subscribe to our channel. Join our community where we share the tales that history forgot to tell. Because these are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us who we have the power to be.